Give it up for Pat. Do you guys have that one friend that you always feel like you need to be the boundaries, the bumper around them? That one friend that you kind of have to apologize for or tell others in advance a little bit about them so they have some context, so there might be a smaller, little bit larger percentage that other people will like the friend that you have? Do you ever feel like there's a lot of my friends are shaking their head vigorously right now, and a lot of people that don't know me are just giving me blank stares? There are friends that just need a little more proper handling. Friends that you just never know really what they're going to say. People like myself that just are exceedingly great at giving terrible first impressions. Anyone relate? A few of us. Ecclesiastes is the weird friend of the Bible. We are going to be in this book for about 3 months, and it is, in my opinion, fascinating because of how different, how unique it really is in the context of our scriptures. We know that the scripture is God-breathed, that it is the very word of God, that it applies to our lives. It is how we meet and know about this God that we worship. But Ecclesiastes, among all of the other books in the Bible, is arguably as godless as any form of literature can be. This is a story, a personal account of a man that almost everyone agrees was Solomon who wrote this. As I said last week, he wrote it toward the end of his life. He started off God-loving and fearing and zealous, and he ended cold and hard-hearted and ridiculously cynical. It is a tale of a life gone wrong, someone who went off the rails. It is not always true in its proper word-for-word understanding, but in the larger context, it helps us understand where a mind and where a heart can stray when they decide to exclude God from the equation of their lives. One of the key terms, two of the key terms of this book, one is vanity, which can be translated and is translated, as you just heard, as meaninglessness or as a wisp or a vapor or a breath. It is something without substance. And that phrase is mentioned roughly 40 times throughout this short book, that the author here continues to let us know life has no purpose, no value, no reasoning whatsoever. Be well fed and happy, let's go. It is a bummer. And another interesting thing that the author says frequently, again, almost 30 times, is under the sun. We know that the author, again, almost everyone agrees it is Solomon, whoever it was, decided to intentionally limit their view of creation and the world and existence and all of the existential questions that come into our minds as human beings to just cut out all of the supernatural, anything of the spiritual realm, anything greater than this physical realm, which in the ancient cosmological understanding, the sun was the ultimate, farthest out kind of sphere of the physical realm. They thought oftentimes that the earth was in the center of the universe because we're that special, and then the sun and everything else rotated around us, and the sun was sort of like the furthest out boundary of the material world, and outside of that lived God and the angels and the spiritual realm. So, this person has come to the ridiculously depressed view that it's worthless, that there are no answers. If you can find any answers, they are meaningless, and the view is redundantly under the sun. And so as we jump into verse 4, I feel so far away from you guys. I can barely spit on you guys up front. Now we're better. It's like a SeaWorld attraction. It's going to be super fun. We went through the first 3 verses last week, and today we're just going to jump in, as you heard Pat read in verse 4. A generation goes, and a generation comes. One of the bummer things about church is that there is often underlying friction between the generations. You'll notice this because if there is a younger, I feel like I'm not either of these at the moment, if there's a younger pastor, they are just so enamored with their culture and with the newness of their generation. And isn't it really endearing and kind of funny that every generation feels like they're the one? They're like the Messiah of all generations. We're going to fix the world, and we're going to solve all these problems that all the other morons for the last few millennia have never been able to figure out. We're going to do it. And sometimes our parents even tell us, like, you can be whatever you want, little Johnny, and you're going to change the world. Maybe not. Sometimes churches end up with a much older person, and they become a little jaded. Oh, these new generations, they're worthless. They are flimsy compared to the robust people that we used to be way back when. Moral compass has just gone astray, and we often just see this growing friction between the generations within, obviously, culture, but even within the context of the church. Solomon here is saying, listen, it honestly doesn't even matter because they're all going to be born and they're all going to die, and it's seemingly like the blink of an eye. It doesn't matter how young or how old you are. If you are old, you were young. If you are young, you're going to get old. It's going to happen to all of us. This is a ridiculously bleak book and passage. So if you're really needing some encouragement, you might be able to catch like an 11 o'clock service somewhere else in Kootenai County. It is okay if you need something like that, and you can leave and just get a coffee in the foyer and not come back. A generation comes and a generation goes, but the earth remains forever. How many of you guys saw the sunset last night? Any of you? I feel like those are like gasps of oxygen in an otherwise depleted, lifeless, bleak, dreary, dull, gray, wet winter. And so those sunsets for me are like oxygen to my soul. It is interesting that for those of us who walk this earth, we have an opportunity to view God's creation literally every single day. How often do we have eyes to see the beauty, the grandeur of life around us? I mean, sometimes we can't because it's so foggy and bleak that you just almost can't see anything. But sometimes when the clouds part and when we do get those rays of sunshine, it is a glorious world in which we live. One of my major hobbies is either hiking or hiking with a weapon, which we call hunting. And I love being outside. I love seeing God's creation. Knowing more about creation helps me be more joyful and thankful and in awe and wonder of what God has made, that there's this globe and this cosmos, and somehow it all works, and the world has been created in such a way, fine-tuned, so that we can continue to exist. This closed system, although it's winding down through entropy, still has all that is needed for thousands, millions of different types of species, from the largest of organisms to the singular cell ones, that it's all functioning and going on around us, whether we have eyes to see it or not, or have the knowledge to understand it, or have yet to be taught that it's happening. You can walk into the forest and get real close to a pine needle, and you can see that there are different levels, and you can understand that it's green because of chloroplasts that are in there, and that this chloroform turns it green, and so this plant can receive the rays of the sunshine and turn them into energy, and that energy is used to convert raw material into the sucrose and the sugars that plant needs. That there are little holes on the bottom of those needles that breathe in air. They're like mouths that open and close at the appropriate time. Then it goes through the needle, and it transforms these atoms into what the tree needs, and it expels a certain gas that is actually pretty good for the world. It's called oxygen, and there's all of this going on. And then these grander ideas of all the things that God has created. This author has chosen to look at life under the sun. Chosen maybe there's not a creator. Chosen that perhaps this is all just chaos and randomly has come to be in this form, and that it is not the good gift from a good father. And so this author just rails against one of the main ways that I come to worship God in my heart: creation. The earth remains forever, like that's a bad thing. The sun rises and the sun goes down, and then as soon as it does, it just whips right around so it can rise again. If you were with someone as negative Nancy as this, how would you respond to them? Like, how do you even interject a word of hope into this person's life? The sun that God has created, 93 million-ish miles away, it is fusing, hydrogen atoms into helium. Once it runs out of hydrogen and everything's helium, it will continue to make larger and more heavy atoms through this idea of fusion. This idea of fusion pushing atoms together because of the extreme mass that is in our sun is just forcing everything to the center, creating incredible amounts of heat and magnetism and pressure, and that forces these atoms to come together. When they do so, they release vast amount of energy, radiation, and light, which brings light to our world. Our sun is pretty stinking amazing. God made it. And so it does that every day and every night. And we get to see it rise and we get to see it set. And it oftentimes makes the sky glorious and beautiful. And all this author can say is it is so boring. It's just going to happen again. You see that sunset? Boring. Probably will happen tomorrow. And boy, won't that be awful. And so he continues on. The wind blows to the south, and it goes around to the north, and on it goes the wind, and on its circuit the wind returns. And so this author is just kind of complaining about, literally everything in the world. So the sun does its thing. It emits light and heat, which makes life possible in our world, but it also releases solar wind through radiation and plasma and magnetic waves that are unleashed into the atmosphere. They would kill us. But God has created our world in such a way that we too have a magnetic force. Yeah, in our magnetosphere, it blocks all of that stuff from literally blowing our atmosphere away, and it interacts with that electronic, magnetic, radiated missile, maybe, that is striking our Earth, and that's how we get the aurora borealis that has been so strong this year. And all of that is, generally speaking, filtered through so that we only get the good light and the heat that makes life possible. The Earth's surface doesn't heat all at the same level, so there are different warmer spots and colder spots, and when those warmer spots warm up, they make the air expand, because that's what hot things do. It rises, it creates a little pressure, so the cold air, which is more dense, rushes into that. On top of this, the Earth is spinning. If you were at the North Pole and it was spinning, you'd literally just be going around in a circle. There's no speed to that. But if you were on the equator, you'd be going more than 1,000 miles an hour as the Earth spins. And because of this, there's varying speeds on the Earth, and that's why all the storms or high or low pressures on Earth are always spinning. In the north, they're spinning counterclockwise if they're a low pressure. The opposite is true in the southern hemisphere. This is called the Coriolis effect. All of this is happening because of the way that the sun is streaming energy and light into our world, because of the way that God has orchestrated his creation. It is mind-bogglingly, wonderfully complex and beautiful. It ought to move us to worship this creator. And instead, this guy goes, the wind's just always going to blow. It's going to blow that way. Then you know what's going to happen? It's going to turn around and blow that way. And it's just always going to blow. These circuits of the wind will always return. What about the water cycle? Man, if anything just gets under my skin, the water cycle. You guys thought it was people from different states driving in our cities recklessly. The next time someone cuts you off with a license plate that's not blue and white and red, you remember that the water cycle is so much more irritating, okay? Okay. God has created the world in such a way that, like, most of the surface of our world is covered in water. Most of the water of our world is not drinkable. It's salt water. Less than 3% of the water is fresh. Most of that is locked away in ice and the polar ice caps. But this system works. Water is evaporated through this, again, sun energy hitting the oceans and other various bodies of water. It evaporates, it goes into the atmosphere where it cools off, where it condensates. It is blown by this wind, which goes every which direction. It goes over the continents. It releases the water through precipitation and snow in our mountains or rain or whatever it is. The water falls upon the earth, and it just does its thing. It goes back and does this cycle over and over and over again. For some reason, Solomon is really turned off by the water cycle. All the streams, they just run to the sea. How dare they? But the sea is never full. The place where the streams flow, they're going to do it again. That stream was there last year, and here it is again. The water cycle strikes again, guys. You guys need to be on alert as God-fearing beings of the water cycle. So there is just this eye that in the New Testament Jesus calls bad or evil. An eye that is not allowing anything good or pleasant or godly to come in. It's only filtering everything in this world through the most negative and pessimistic and nihilistic way possible. Things that are good and God-glorifying and awe-inspiring and worth looking into, this guy says, no, none of it. Worthless. All things, picking up in verse 8, are full of weariness. You guys want to learn about that stuff? It's going to be boring and stupid and a waste of your time, okay? The water cycle. And man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. It is fascinating that someone who didn't have social media and someone who didn't have all of the forms of audio that we do already understood that we as human beings, even if we're okay with creation and the water cycle, we are insatiable with just wanting more. Even if God did create this and it was wonderful, although this author can't accept that at the moment, well, us humans, even if it were good, the argument now goes, we would just want more. It would never be enough. You might have a beautiful sunset on Saturday night and be longing for one on Sunday afternoon. Was it even of any value Saturday night? Because you're already wanting more. When will be enough? In our context, is your eye satisfied? If you just rewind this last week, what are the things that you have allowed through your eyes into your soul? The cheesiest question of all, which any fifth grader in Sunday school class should answer, is, would you have done that if Jesus in the flesh was sitting next to you? The shows you binge-watched, the doom scrolling for 42 hours even though you don't have any time to read your Bible this week, all of the things you've ingested by your own will. And it's not enough. It just doesn't satisfy. One more scroll. Sooner or later, there's going to be the best post I've ever seen in my life, and I will lay aside social media forever because I will be satisfied. Have you ever heard anyone doing that? There's just too much, and yet we just want more and more and more. We crave all of this stuff, but the things under the sun simply cannot satisfy. My question is, where has your eye been? What things have you been going to looking for satisfaction that things of this world simply cannot satisfy? It is interesting that I was reading this article from Popular Mechanics, which was years old, so certainly this has only become worse. One major pornographic website boasted several years ago that they had over 7,000 years of video material for their customers to consume. Did you know that there is more sin in this world than you can watch for lifetimes upon lifetimes? And yet too many of us engage, are hooked on these things. It'll satisfy me next time. Next time I doom scroll or binge watch or the next new show that comes out or this wonderful thing that I've begun following or the sinful thing in which I engage, sooner or later I'm going to hit pay dirt and it's going to satisfy my soul. At least the wisdom of understanding is still intact in the heart of Solomon by saying, no, your eye is never going to be satiated. Your hearing will never ever find a time where you're like, oh, I'm full of podcasts. You know what? I listened to the best sermon online today, and after I tell my pastor about it, I think that I'm going to retire from listening to all other sermons. We just need more and more and more. How many of you, almost always, from the moment you wake up to literally through falling asleep, have some form of sound in your life? Heaven forbid we're alone with our thoughts and with our Creator. And so this author is helping us to recognize these things you are running after, they will not satisfy the deep cravings, the thirst within you. He moves on to this grasping after the newness of things. What has been, will be, what has been done, it will yet be done again, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing in which it is said, see, this is new? Yeah, but he didn't know about the iPhone, whatever model is newest, did not know about that. The point is not that he's saying that literally there's nothing new. I am pretty sure there have never been smartphones in history. Pretty sure there's never been rocket launches to space in history. I'm pretty sure a lot of things are actually new in our lives that have never ever been before. But they're going to be superseded. In fact, there's always been something new. That's the way the world lives, is to run after the newest model, the newest phone, the newest car, the newest whatever. In fact, newness itself is so old. When will we stop playing this game? When will we stop chasing after the rabbit, which we can never catch? In that context, there's nothing new in the sense that it is novel, it will satisfy you. It is the one answer that you have been looking for. It has already been done in the ages before us. Yet there is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of latter things yet to be among those who come after. And so Solomon is saying, just generally as a culture, things maybe might be new for a little bit, but don't worry, the old things that you despise, they were new and shiny once. And the new and shiny things now which you love, you will despise later on when they're old and no longer shiny. It is just a thing that we do. Like we have no memory that this game has no winner. That is a perpetual chase without any prize at the end. Are you excited for one more chunk of this? Woo-hoo-hoo! I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. He's reminding us that he has some qualifications. There is some pedigree to this person. Certainly we know that God granted this man more wisdom than any other human being had ever had in history. And so here's what he says he's going to do now. And I applied my heart to seek and to search out. Those words are really interesting. This word seek is more than just like a hide-and-go-seek thing. It means hardcore work and investigation of sorts. If you've ever known someone getting their master's or working through their thesis for their doctorate, this is the type of long-term, in-depth study that this word in the original Hebrew context is seeking to understand or to explain to us. So the hard work, the diligent work, the thorough, systematic investigation, and a searching. The searching is interesting because in the Old Testament, it's most often used when spies are sent into the land to seek out to see whether or not there are weak spots, if it's worthwhile to attack. Oftentimes, it just means like to scout out or to survey some sort of thing that oftentimes people wanted to engage with so that they could own. And so Solomon's saying, I have approached this thoroughly. I have done all the work that is possible systematically. That's been my approach. And I've done so with an eye toward what can be obtained. Where's the value? Is this obtainable? And all of this was for wisdom. I wanted wisdom, but let's remember, we're not acknowledging God here. Just wisdom for all that is done under heaven, under the sun. And here's the conclusion of Solomon. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. So it's getting worse, guys. So we've at least got some momentum here. Solomon's conclusion, after who knows how long this comprehensive search for wisdom under heaven was, it is this, that it's a bad portion we've been given. It's fascinating even to see the word that Solomon uses for God. Like I said last week, it is never the proper name, this Yahweh personal covenant name of God. He does not use that once in this book. But this word simply means Elohim. It can refer to a judge or a ruler or a magistrate, any form of power. It can also be related to spiritual beings, not necessarily God. Oftentimes, it is related specifically to God, but if you had to acknowledge God's existence, in many ways, this is the most agnostic, neutral term you can ascribe to him. And so even though Solomon is begrudgingly admitting that there's probably the existence of an almighty God, he certainly does not want that God near or personal or dear to his heart. And in fact, even while ignoring God, somehow he's blaming God for all the problems. Have you ever met people like that? You're like, man, you are so mad at this God you say doesn't exist. I think there's some work to do sometimes in some of us. And so Solomon's result is just, it's unhappy if there's a God he's given us to this children of man to be busy with. The children of man is also interesting because most frequently Solomon, king of Israel, God's chosen people, his heritage, his sons and his daughters, they have many specific names in the Old Testament, and the children of man is most often used to describe humanity in general, frequently used to distinguish Gentiles apart from the God-chosen Jews. And so again, he's choosing the least godly way to write about himself and about God and even about God's children. It's this generic God has given us a bum deal to all humanity. We're going to just be busy with it. I've seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after the wind. Do you guys know, and I hope you do, 2 plus 2? Okay, what if we all gathered together and we decided, I can't remember. Do you remember how long 2 plus 2 has equaled 4? It's been a while, right? And so if we all decided how boring, 4 just really is a constraint, it's frustrating. It's been that way for generations. And we want something new. We're going to figure out a different way for 2 and 2 to equal something else. But it will not be 4. Can we agree we're going to do something new? And so it's as if Solomon has done this. I'm going to decide that God's not real, that he's not personal, that he's not involved with my life, and I'm going to solve all of life's problems by myself. The answer is not 42. And I thought some of you would think that's funny. Nope. No pop culture references from here on out. And so Solomon has decided, without God, I can find another solution. I can do this. I'm smart enough. I've got the resources. I've got the time. I've got the wisdom. We're going to crack this code. And it's as if we all gathered together and we said 2 plus 4 has got to be something new. Let's call in the greatest minds in the world, the most educated math experts, the most out-of-the-box creative thinkers, and we just beat our heads against the wall. And after years, we had to come together and say, you know what? 2 plus 2 stinks. I don't ever want to hear that again. There's no solution. In fact, it is unsolvable. Literally no one can ever know the answer to this equation. The smallest of children would be like, you guys are kind of stupid. And the answer remains 4, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. And so Solomon is doing this with the case of God. And so certainly he will come to an understanding that, no, this was vanity. This was a chasing after the wind. I just poured my life out for this investigation, and it turns out that it didn't give me the answer that I was looking for. And so he continues to complain. What is crooked cannot be straight. What is lacking cannot be counted. There are no answers when you ignore the one answer that has been given to us. And so Solomon has begun to recognize this, though he certainly won't admit it within his heart. This is what he says in his heart. Verse 16, I have said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, which is kind of funny because he's the third king. So that sounded really good on paper, and then you do the math and you're like, well, top out of 3. Good job, Solomon. I've acquired great wisdom. I've surpassed all who are before me over Jerusalem. My heart has had great experience of wisdom and of knowledge. He's not thanking God for this gift, not acknowledging the source of this wisdom or knowledge that was given to him. And I applied my heart to know wisdom, and he has. He was, again, the most wise, the most educated human being on earth. Kings and queens from all over the known world came to him to answer their questions, to get these mysteries solved, to tell him riddles and received correct answers from them. He did this. He was the pinnacle of worldly knowledge and wisdom and expertise, and he's saying at the end of the day, it was worthless without the source of this knowledge. You could know as much as you want to, have the most full brain in the world, but without God of gods, without the creator and the sustainer of life, the lover of our souls, what else is there? Maybe the one thing Solomon got right in this passage is the answer is nothing. I hope that you understand that there's a God. My hope is if you're here, you either believe in or open to believing in his existence and his love for you manifested through Jesus. My hope is that we can walk through this book and understand that though we might walk with Jesus, and though this might be an offensive or at least a bewildering book in Scripture, that it is a wonderful picture into what life could be like without God. Sometimes we have it so good for so long that we forget that these blessings, that the goodness of life simply comes from God, not us, not our own doing, not our behavior, but the goodness of our God. Solomon's life can be a lesson that we don't have to live through. We might claim to understand this, but as Solomon shows us, you can be smart and have well-resourced lives, but if you continue to not acknowledge God, things will end poorly. So often Christians have the correct lip service and they claim allegiance to God, but what is going on in your heart? Are your eyes wandering towards things that you know are not constructive? What things in this world are you maybe intentionally or inadvertently making into these idols? Things that can't satisfy your soul, but you're going to try it anyway. Running after pleasure instead of walking in obedience to God. Solomon tried this, and he says it's worthless. In fact, he said, I even decided to know madness and folly, and that must have been a dark rabbit hole, because he doesn't even mention how that went. I think we can all agree it probably went pretty bad. When the king of a country decides, I'm going to act like a raving lunatic. Maybe that's the answer to life. Who knows? No, apparently not. He doesn't even tell us more. He just says, I tried to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is a striving after the wind. For in much wisdom there is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. This is kind of like a humble brag and a complaint at the same time. It's as if Solomon's patting us low intellect people on the head and saying, you wouldn't understand the burden of being this intelligent. You should be so thankful to God that you're morons, because being as smart as I am is so lonely and isolating. And even though I'm incredibly smart, smarter than all of you put together, it's terrible, guys. How many of you guys kind of want to slap this person in the face? So Solomon ends this chapter, this thought, this entry into his journal or whatever this was by simply saying it's vanity, it's worthless. Even good things like knowledge and wisdom, if not applied in the correct context, are utterly worthless to our lives. Only God is that supreme pursuit that will satisfy, that will meet our needs, that will satiate the thirst of our souls. I was fascinated this week to learn that this book, Ecclesiastes, of the Bible, it was a prescribed reading for the festival of joy for the Jews. That's incongruent. So there's this festival. It's called Sukkot, or the Festival of Booths, or the Festival of Tabernacles, and it was prescribed. It's one of 3 in the Old Testament that God says, you have to do this, no excuses. So these people would come to Jerusalem if they lived within the certain perimeter, and for a week they would party hard. It was written that they would often party all day and all through the night into the morning. They would bring all of their food. It was also coincided with harvest, so they'd bring the best of their food, grain, fruit, meat, the best of their wines, and they would eat and drink themselves silly for a week. The climax of this joyous occasion was this last day, which according to the sages, these old Jewish sages, was literally the most joyful day of the entire calendar year. And during this day of the year, this book of Ecclesiastes was read. So these people are living in the abundance of harvest. They're in Jerusalem, the city of God, the city of the King, and they're celebrating. They've had the week off. They are eating. They are drinking. They are as satisfied as a human being can possibly be. And in the middle of that, some poor guy has to get up here and read Ecclesiastes to a bunch of people who do not want to listen. Kind of like what's happening right now. And it was so interesting to me that concurrently, on this last day, the rabbis or the priests would go out of the temple of Jerusalem. They'd go down to a brook. They would get some water from the brook. They'd carry it up, and they'd pour it out on the altar. And this tasteless, odorless, colorless water that seemed so bland would be poured out as a symbol of the prayers of God's people upon the altar, saying, would you continue to supply bounty, both physically and spiritually through your presence for yet another year, O Lord. And so if you fast forward from Solomon, and this goes on for centuries, one particular last day of this Feast of Booths, this guy got up on the last day, and he interrupts all of this cacophony of praise and water pouring and who knows what else, maybe literally while someone's reading Ecclesiastes. And in John 7:37 through 39, it says, on the last day of the feast, the great day, Jesus stood up and he cried out. He's yelling over the crowd, if anyone thirsts. Well, these people have been feasting for a week. You thought Thanksgiving afternoon was bad? Yeah, multiply that by 7 and see how you feel. They were gluttonous by the end of this. They had been so overfed and overdrunk that it was probably like they didn't even want anymore. There was too much. And in the midst of this earthly blessing and supply and abundance, Jesus has the gall to say this, if anyone thirsts, let him come unto me. Whoever believes in me, as the scriptures have said, quoting Isaiah, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. And so Jesus stands in the midst of this weird, like, depressing Ecclesiastes going on, and like the best the world has to offer us, and we're going to celebrate for a week. And in the middle of that, Jesus says, listen, without me, life is Ecclesiastes. There's no purpose, and there's no reason, and there's no meaning, and there's no order. It is chaos and worthlessness and vanity. But if you also just want to strive towards the world, it is wearisome and it is toil, and you will find at the end of your life that you're really no better off than the Ecclesiastes attitude, because you will have nothing extra for all of your effort. But in the middle of that, if you could meet the God of the blessings, the one who will actually satisfy your soul, if you would drink deep from Jesus, you will find that your soul is finally at ease and at peace. My challenge to you is this week, would you drink deeply of Jesus? We are often so broken and so complicated, and our issues are so deep in the back of our brains that we will act out, whether we're in fear or anxiety or stress or even in joy, and we will run to earthly things to get satisfied, to check out, to sedate ourselves. And Jesus is saying, if you're doing that, good news, you've got more opportunity in your life to drink from Jesus. Because you know that those things aren't satisfying your thirst. You know that they repeat this repetitious cycle of self-destruction and shame and regret, which just leads you to do that thing again. And Jesus, in the midst of the temple and in the midst of us today, is saying, listen, I know you're thirsty. Would you be willing to admit it? Are you real enough with yourself to maybe stop looking at the things you're looking at and to stop hearing the things that you need to hear all day? And would you wait in silence for the God who longs to meet you in the quiet and arid places of your soul so that he can transform these deserts into streams of flowing water? As we walk with Christ this week, this is our joy. This is our obligation, our duty as sons and daughters of God. And remember that these living waters that flow, they just continue. Would you share this living water with others in your life? People who are doing terrible things, maybe to you, people who are acting out of brokenness, people who are unloving and jaded and cynical as Solomon was at the end of his life. Would you step into that, not in a reactionary worldly way, but in a Christ-like way and say, hey, I see you're thirsting. I have met something that satisfies my soul. I have seen the one who is the answer to these questions. He is Jesus, and he is the exact opposite of vanity of vanities. He is the exact opposite of the world under the sun. He is the answer. If we know him, let us share him with the world this week. Would you guys stand with me? And would you pray with me? God, we come before you today recognizing how good you are. Lord, would you give us the gift of seeing your creation as a signpost that tells of your glory? God, would you give us ears to hear that all creation sings the praises of our God? God, would you move us toward worship when we see the beauty and the grandeur of the created world? Would we recognize that the cycles and the seasons and the rhythms that you have established, God, that they just point to you, to a creator, to order? God, we also recognize that we run after so many things in this world that are so much smaller than you and what you've made. God, we try to make small things the ultimate thing, and for that, would you please forgive us of our sin? God, would you convict me? Would you convict this church of the idolatry that so often takes place without our noticing it? Would you help us to name it for what it really is and to confess those sins to you? God, there are people in this room I know that are not walking with you, that think this is foolishness, a weakness, a crutch for weak-minded people. God, would you show them the absolute worthlessness of a life in a world without a loving God supporting all of it? Would you move them toward the love of Jesus Christ? God, would they drink deeply from him and be satisfied of soul? God, for those of us who are yours, would you remind us of how good we have it in you? God, would you move us towards praise and worship and adoration of the living water who has come into the deserts of our soul and renewed life where once only death existed? We praise you for being such a good God, Lord. We pray this in your name. Amen. Church, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you, and may he lift his countenance to you and give you his peace. Thank you.